Let's talk today a bit about the mental game, a bit more in detail as to what I actually did when I competed and what I did while I was practicing leading up to very important competitions.
You're watching the Kaminski YouTube channel.
So over the last several weeks, it's come up several different times as to what I am thinking about or what I was thinking about while I competed. Because everybody asks, what do you do mentally? How do you handle it? How do you address it? And ultimately, they're looking for a bit of a direction that they can focus on to do better themselves. Because, you hear everybody talk about how archery is super high level percentages of like what matters of, a ratio of mental acuity, mental focus, mental whatever, and physical being form and whatnot. So it's like how much is which, and everybody says, well, it's like 90% mental and 10% physical at the highest levels. I argue every other sport does that too, though. As far as like what takes and separates the best from the rest is just basically what's between the ears. That's pretty standard across every single sport in my experience, with the exception of, some few anomalies here or there. Obviously, talent comes into play, work ethic, and, things like that are obviously important, technique, obviously. But mostly you just hear everybody talk about mental and how it's so important, but nobody spends the time to really train mentally. At least very few people do. So, the age-old question is, well, if you think archery is 90% mental and 10% physical, do you spend 90% of your time working on your mental game and 10% on your physical game? Obviously, everybody's like, well, no, I need to shoot my bow. Obviously. So the whole deal is to think about and actively work on your mental game while you're practicing, while you're getting ready for a competition, putting in those reps, shooting those arrows at blank bale, doing form master, SBT, shot trainer, scoring, any sort of thing that you're doing. You always want to make sure you're working on your mental game in addition to the actual physical stuff you're doing. For whatever reason, there seems to be a bit of a breakdown between what club level shooters think and what high level shooters think. I don't know where the breakdown occurs and where it happens. And there's an odd assumption about the elite level archers versus, from the club level perspective of they do some fancy magic like voodoo that puts them in positions to be able to manage their mental game for whatever reason. At least after working with a lot of archers and coaching a bunch of people at various different levels, I see a trend that is quite apparent in that a lot of people just have a odd assumption of being that there is a magical voodoo thing that the top people do. But there's not. It's not that way. In fact, it is the same thing that you teach low-level people to do. Think about the process and stay in the process itself. Have a few cues, a few important things to focus on. So, if anything, that's where it kind of differentiates and separates from a club level shooter to an elite level shooter, whereas a club level has a lot of things going on, a lot of things they're working on. There's a lot of calculations, a lot of data, a lot of distractions, a lot of things that are coming in that person needs to deal with and to try to move forward as best as they can. Whereas the high level shooter has a few key things to focus on and pushes the rest out because it's just distracting and useless information, useless data, and ultimately just can lead to a downfall of that day's performance. The main thing that unites both types of archers is that you should stay focused in the process. So in the moment, what you're doing, you need to be focused on. So you need to be focused on how anchors feel, like how your anchor feels, how you get to anchor, the alignment, the string alignment, the bone alignment, things like that. How do those affect me as a club level shooter, and how do I get into those positions? How do I repeat them? At least that's what should be done ideally in that situation. And at the high level, it's the very same thing. What is my key to shoot a 10? Well, I need to make sure I'm in alignment. I need to make sure I hold my bow the same way, hook the grip the same way, and do all of those things that this person is primarily focusing on, all those little details or the things that they have just learned. They already know it. Those things are focused on and are important. I, every single time, make sure I hold on to the string in the exact same manner. I make sure I put my grip, my hand in the grip in the exact same manner every single time. I make sure I breathe the same way from shot to shot. And I make sure I think about the same thing every single shot. So I may not necessarily, and the high level archers may not necessarily be thinking about the exact super detailed way on how to hook the string. A lot of us just go by feel. There is a visual check to make sure, very briefly, but it's mostly I'm looking to make sure that I don't knock the arrow off of my plunger or off the rest, because I want to make sure it fits in between my two fingers or whatever. Or if I'm string walking, I will have to, of course, check my crawl, but then when I set my hook, it's all based on feel. Where does the string sit on my fingers? And I go based off the feel because I have built up my feeling. I have shot more than enough arrows to get to that place. But ultimately, it's no different between the club level shooter and the elite level shooter. It's just the elite level shooter can start to focus on more of the broad spectrum of what it takes to get the arrow in the 10 ring. There are so many different things, and everybody's different. Somebody can say words, somebody can think of feelings, and many different ways to attain those levels of proficiency. Mostly it just comes from time behind the bow, spending the time to shoot lots of arrows repeatedly with the same intent, the same intention of trying to shoot the arrow the same way with whatever chosen method of form they are choosing. But then you just try to make sure you hit your marks every single time moving forward, and you don't have any sort of like miss or any sort of thing that would happen that would cause you to deviate from the plan that you have shot for the past X amount of years and the past X amount of hundreds of thousands of arrows from that ideal. You don't want that something to distract you, pull you out of that what ideal scenario would be. And the focus is the same thing every single time. Try to control everything that I normally try to do, hit my marks that I know are super ultra important for success. Things like, how does my back feel? Do I feel like I'm engaged in my back? Whereas a club level shooter may say, I need to lead with my shoulder and draw back this way, rotate my chest to make sure I feel stacked here as much as possible. So that way when I come into alignment, I feel bone to bone structure and I feel engaged and equalized on both sides of the equation. At least that's where it can be to get to alignment, where I can just go, yep, that feels like alignment, because I recognize the feeling in my back. I recognize what it feels like and the tension and where it is to give me the gauge of whether or not I'm in alignment. So it becomes a little bit simpler, or at least more simplified in the amount of details that ultimately get focused on, but it is still the same thing. I'm trying to hit the same marks, I'm still trying to control the same thing, and I'm thinking the same thing every single shot on purpose. I'm not letting somebody behind me distract me. I'm not letting a person in the crowd screaming distract me. I'm not letting people trying to get into my headspace distract me on purpose, obviously, because they want to win. So my job as the archer is to do the same thing every single time. That's physical, but also to think the same thing every single time. That's not always possible. There are little things that do need to be thought about differently in one day versus the other. For example, if it's really windy, I'm going to really pay attention to where the wind is coming from and how it's acting. I'm really going to pay attention to that stuff. But indoors, I don't focus on that at all, obviously, because there's no windsock. So you don't need to think of that. So that kind of stuff changes. But ultimately, the main parts that cause me to have a high chance to have the arrow go in the 10 ring when I release it is what I focus on. That's the key. What is the thing that gives me the highest chance to give me the opportunity to have the success? You have to do the same thing to give yourself that opportunity and that chance to have the result you're hoping for. Because if you're just guessing and you're just allowing it to happen, there is no rhyme or reason, there's no control, and there's no guidance there from the thing that controls everything that you do, your brain. So being cognizant of that and being aware of the fact that the highest level archers do the same thing with deliberative like authority and conviction, and do it on purpose because it is key to allow them the best chance to shoot that 10. So, there are little things you can add in addition to that, which eventually we can talk about if anybody's interested. You can comment below and ask some more questions in regards to details. I'd be happy to answer them in another video coming up in the future. But I just wanted to give you a bit of a rundown as to what it is to be a high-level athlete and how you have to think about the same thing, just like a club level shooter does. It's a little bit more difficult as a club level shooter because there are so many moving parts. There's a lot of things you got to think about. There's a lot of marks you need to hit in order to give yourself the best chance possible to shoot those 10s. So sitting there and making a checklist inside your head, writing it down in your notebook. What is the order of operations that I think about? Well, first is feet first. Next, it is thinking about loading the arrow into the bow in the same way. You got to make sure the nock's set the same way. I don't know how much detail will matter to you. Each person is different, but the nock setting is important. But if you've moved past that point and you don't need that reminder, then you don't need to think about that. So, nock the string, hook and grip, and then I look at the target, I take a breath, center myself, give myself the opportunity to now think about what I'm doing physically and try to feel what I'm doing physically and try to replicate it and hit my marks. So I lift the bow in the same way, trying to lift with this shoulder primarily, let this side follow. And as I settle down just that little bit before I go to draw back, I lead with my shoulder to get into a position to where I'm locked into place, come up to anchor, settle into the shot, check my string alignment, start aiming, and deliver the arrow and finish the shot. That is the type of thing that you can think of in the beginning. As you get more and more advanced, you may not have those little details to think about. But in the same time, you may need to add extra details in the process. So for example, hook and grip, cool, that's super simple. But what if your coach comes up to you and says, you need to hook in this way with this pressure on this particular part of your finger in this manner? Okay, well, I need to hook up into this thing with this pressure on that finger in this particular manner. Okay, I've got it. Take my breath, center myself, lift with this side, leading with the shoulder. This side follows. I draw with the shoulder as I lock into position. And as you can see, nothing else has changed in the process that I had set up, except for adding a bit of a detail in a process here. So as I hook in this particular manner with a pressure in this specific spot up in this direction, I lift with the shoulder. It just continues over and over and over again. May not be the most exciting thing in the world to think about. Shooting 10s is exciting, so that is the motivating factor to put in this kind of, deliberate work on purpose that is extremely monotonous and extremely exhausting. If you're doing your job correctly, not only should you be physically tired by the end of a training session, you should also be mentally exhausted as well. That is the point. You need to train the physical body with proper form and technique as best as you can manage at least, and then apply a mental program, mental process, a mental thought process, a game, whatever you want to call it, that you do hit your marks every single time, and you do that for every single shot. You do your best to manage, to deal with the stresses, to deal with the pressure, and to hit your marks every single time. Now, I didn't say much about at a tournament, but it's no different there. The thing that can change at a high level is what is the exact key, that one detail, maybe two details, that actually need to happen on that given day that may not have had to have been thought about the previous 100 days of practice or the previous 5 tournaments, but for whatever reason, that thing is the key to success that day. Meaning, if I do my job, and if I don't falter massively, and if I also don't just have the stars align, I know that I'm going to shoot somewhere in the neighborhood of like a 330 to 335 at 70 meters on 36 arrows. That's like my go-to range, or it was when I was competing. So if I'm in that range, that means I've done my job. But what's the difference between 330, 335, and 345, a true world-class score or higher? And what that is just finding that key, that moment, that singular thing that I need to focus on that makes it work for that given day. So what is that, and what do I mean by that? For me, at least, I'm not going to speak for anybody else. And I don't know what other people do to the exact degree, but I know what I needed to do, and so I'll just share that. Basic. You travel, you deal with jet lag, deal with dehydration, deal with the mental fatigue of travel, and all of the things that you need to do to compete, to go to nationals, you go to states, you go to your local club shoot, you go across the world to world championships or the Olympic Games. It doesn't matter. It's all the same type of thing and all the same type of stress. But that day, I slept really, really odd, and for whatever reason, my levator scapula is tight on this right side, and so I'm sore, I didn't sleep well, I slept on my arm weird, and my shoulder just doesn't feel right, and the chiropractor or physio or whoever is with the team that day just didn't quite get me back to baseline. They got me a little closer, but still it's a problem. And I'm noticing I'm having a really hard time getting through the clicker. For whatever reason, it's just really difficult. I'm pulling, and it just won't go. I can't get it to set off. And so I get frustrated, I get distracted, and you can go down that route, or you can go down, okay, why am I not getting through the clicker? What are the things that causes that? Obviously, clicker in the wrong place. Check it. Nope, it's in the place it's always been. Maybe I'll adjust it a little bit just to make it slightly easier so I can still get warm-ups going through practice. And then I notice maybe my hand isn't in the right place. Nope, it's in the right place. Maybe I didn't set my bow shoulder right. Nope, that's good. Maybe my alignment's not quite there. Something feels a little bit off, but it still is close enough. It shouldn't be causing this type of issue. Okay, well then I'm gonna really evaluate how my release feels and my follow through. And because that tells me a lot about the tension built up in the shot. Maybe I have a coach look at me and say, hey, yes, no, what, maybe so, what's going on here? And I notice that my release is just popping in a manner that's down. It's a little weird. It's not as rounded as it normally is. So that gives me a cue of there's something that is built up and a tension that is in a way that just isn't the same. And so I go, oh, man, you're right. My levators have been a little tight. And I realize as I set my hook and my grip, before I go to lift the bow, I start with a little bit of an elevated shoulder. And as I go to draw, that tension's just built up in a way that's not normal, shortens up my draw length a little bit, maybe binds me up in a way that I can't get through the clicker. And so I go, okay, I'm gonna set my shoulder back down instead of being here during my breath. I really set my shoulder down, make sure I'm relaxed, and then I go through the shot. But by the time I get back to anchor, click, that's what it was. Move my clicker back to where it was. Now for the whole rest of the day, I get that shoulder down and then go through the shot process, and my shots click, and luckily I found that secret before my first scoring arrow of the day, and now it's easy to shoot, just as it was before practice. Thousands of arrows before that day or whatever. I recognize it's just my shoulder, so I need to add a tiny little change into my shot process of take that extra time, set that shoulder down, and then go through the shot, and you'll get through the clicker. That is the key to get from that average to really well off at a tournament. It's just, what is that key moment? And it might be two things, but never more than three things. And that's really the difference between, for me, super high level of performance and a relatively average level of performance. So I don't know if that makes sense, but it's just kind of trying to show you a illustration between a club level and a more elite level shooter. Now, something else that I did discuss with somebody at the range today while I was coaching them is kind of having a ratio of control and confidence. You need to shoot with both, of course, because you need to do the same thing every single time. That's control. But confidence is having that ability to get up at full draw and just expand with authority despite having that sight pin blowing around in the wind and just deliver that arrow in the 10 ring. That is confidence, to just have supreme belief in yourself and really just make things happen or let things happen, depending on your definition and depending on your perspective. So control and confidence, there's those two things. Your job is to figure out where do you fall in this line on that given practice day, that given tournament day, to decide where you need to be. If you had just made a whole lot of form changes, you're going to be way closer to control. But once you get to full draw, try to default back to wherever you live in the control confidence spectrum. You'll tend to go further this way the more proficient you get. And as that happens, you need to control what you need to control when you're making form changes, but when you're competing, and ultimately once you get to full draw, after you have separated the drawing and the loading phase, getting the bow back, and the execution phase, expanding to set the clicker off, once you get to that point, that switch there, you need to go more towards confidence and just have that ability to shoot it. But in a tournament, like I said, my shoulder's up, I need to control a little bit more earlier in the shot. But ultimately, once I get back to full draw, after I've transferred, settled into the shot, and I'm ready to set that clicker off and shoot a 10, I'm gonna have to be more towards that confidence spectrum. So I don't know if you can kind of see how it drifts back and forth, and there is a little bit of variance there at the highest ends, but ultimately it's still the same thing between the two. That means club level and elite level, controlling the shot as much as you can. Not only that, doing the same thing as much as you can every single shot, Not only that, thinking about the same thing every single shot. That's what a mental game is. That's what mental practice is. And that's how high-level shooters think. At least I do, or did. And when I do my job, I shoot so much better, both in practice and in competition. And if I do my job in practice and really focus, it makes me better, faster, and then I can reap the benefits in competition.